1300, and as late as the year 1500. But we go back even further than that time. We go back to the 9th century. And that's what I'm going to show. So there'll be three parts of this. The Munneleys in County Mayo, and then our origins when we were in Donegal. And lastly, on the pronunciation, I may be getting some of these wrong, and I'd like the help of Mary Manley and Sean, and also Catherine. I believe you're from Ireland too, so maybe you can help too. So if I'm way off base, just don't hesitate to put me in line. So Peter mentioned this, that the place to begin in looking for Munnelly history is the Ordnance Survey records from 1838 that Peter mentioned, where John O'Donovan mentioned that Valley Munnelly was settled by Munneleys, led by a man named Manley O'Doherty. And the time of the settlement was probably about, according to what Donovan knew, was about 200 years earlier. Most of us, as Peter has mentioned, thought there was probably a connection with the O'Doherty revolt in 1608, that somehow that was the cause. When I gave the migration, when I gave this presentation a year ago, that's what I believed. And since then, I've actually found that that's not so. I was going to go over the various places where we're found, but I think Peter did a really good job of explaining exactly where we're found, so I don't think I need to go into that. So the first there's that same Ordnance Survey. There's the map of the parishes a little bit. This is the contemporary map rather than the historic one Peter showed us. And then this is the earliest Munneleys that we can find. And they appeared in 1593 in what is known as the Tudor fiance. These were sort of like royal decrees that they had in England, but they called them the Tudor fiance in Ireland. This is a pardon that was given March 8, 1593, and it lists, as you can see, eight Munneleys. They were living in Ballycastle. So the fiance I think are of interest to a lot of people here because they list about 340 individuals, and mainly heads of families, and this is probably the first time a lot of the other names that maybe in your family line are actually going to be found. So it's worth looking at. And I have the website, Munnelly Origins, where you can download the Tudor fiance, and you can actually look through it. It's very tedious, but you'll probably find a lot of the same other family names there, so it's very interesting. And it's probably the first list in English of a family name, so it's quite significant. So I want to go to the next slide. So it mentions Ballycastle as the place the Munneleys were found. This is Dufini, last year of the family reunion. Dufini is very close to Ballycastle. Sometimes that area is referred to as Ballycastle. Sometimes it's referred to as Dufini. So it's not the same location. Ballycastle is today a small town. Dufini is not. but this gives you some feel for what that area looks like. These particular tombstones, I think, were made in like the late 19th century, if I'm not mistaken. They're not hundreds of years old. Just set the record straight, but it gives you an idea of that general area. So O'Donovan said that Ballymunley was named for the Munleys. That's what he implied. And for a long time, that just was not confirmed by anything. Last October, I was looking through a new collection of records which was put online out of Trinity College, and they have what are called, it's called the 1641 Deposition Project. And this lists people who were named in depositions back in that time, generally involving crimes of property. There was a very large revolt which, at that time, in which the Irish nearly threw the British out. And of all places in County Down, I found this deposition. So it says, the deposition was taken a year after the event that is mentioned. It says that T. O'Manley and Richard O'Manley of Ballymonley, which is sometimes another spelling, Ballymonley, along with Richard Barrett of Clontakilla and Edmund Barrett of Inishki, I think, and several others were named on crimes on Edmund Barrett's land in County Mayo. Probably don't have enough time actually to go into the whole background of that revolt, but it is interesting. This was a time where a lot of the small farmers and tenants were very stressed, and the convention was that people paid their landlord twice a year. They paid November 1st, and then later in the spring. This revolt took place a week before then. It was coordinated throughout the island, and it was, you can see the implications. If I kill my landlord or drive him off, I'm not going to have to pay half a year rent. And this was a serious plot. It sounds a lot like, if you remember the Vietnam War, the Tet Offensive. The Irish had smuggled soldiers into Dublin. They were going to seize the castle, kind of like the U.S. Embassy was almost overrun in the Tet Offensive. Within days, the British were driven out of most of Northern Ireland, and there were coordinated attacks against landlords. It wasn't a pleasant period. Someone termed this the 1641 as the age of atrocity. So it's kind of like the conflict we're now seeing in Syria. But it did not succeed, but it was probably one of the, came as close as anybody had ever come to finally throwing the British out. After that time, they went back and had depositions, and people would I guess, get compensation if they could prove they had suffered damages during the revolt. So that's why the depositions were taken together, evidence about property loss. Anyway, it does show that the Munleys were there very early. In fact, the records show a continuing presence of Munleys right in this area, because somewhat later, in about 1743, there was a man named Father James Munnelly, who was a priest in this area. He was recorded. And then also there was another priest in 1704 who lived in Clontakilla. This was during the time of the registration of the clergy, where there were only about 50 legal priests in the whole island. They had to register where they were, there could only be one in each parish, and they had to supply a bond by two people, 50 pounds. So there was probably an underground church too, but this was the above ground part. So he was, this James Munnelly, includes a Q, which is very close to Valley Munnelly, was one of those people. So it'd be nice to go back further, to get back further and find records before the 1593 pardons. And the next time we find records that are usable is in a group of what are known as topographical poems that were taken down in 1470. And these are found throughout Ireland. They probably could have been written by poets. They're in Gaelic. And they run very much to probably the kind of toast that people would give on an occasion where I would say, well, there was nobody as great as Patricia or more friendly, and how can we forget Mary Ann? And Peter's always a good fellow, but it's mentioning family names around you, but they're very complete. So you find the same family names that you find in the pardon in 1593, you find those same family names mentioned in the poems. But you don't find any Munnellys. And that leads me to think that they came into the area after 1417. So let's move on and talk a little bit about Valley Munnelly itself. I wish there were a key I could just press.
You can press the down key, can't you?
Which one?
Down key?
Or the right arrow?
Yeah.
Oh, great. That's better now. Okay. So this is actually the first time we see Valley Munnelly in the written record. It was Mary Ann was the first person who brought this to my attention when we first met several years ago. And you can actually see there it says also Valley Munnelly consisting of one quarter, also Glenmoy in Carden consisting of one quarter, several others in that neighborhood. So what was actually going on here was the policy that was known as surrender and regrant. And what that was that usually it would be a clan, the most powerful person in a particular area or a clan leader would make an arrangement with the crown where they would surrender their land, and in return they would get papers giving them the land legally under British law. Now what they had to do in return was to supply the king, the king's men, a specific number of men and horses. So the idea is if the king is attacked, or he needs